We begin today's show with U.S. President Donald Trump to assert U.S. leadership in space exploration. Trump authorized acting NASA Administrator Robert Lightfoot Jr. to lead an innovative program to send American astronauts back to the moon and eventually to the Mars. But the feasibility of these goals are still subject to debate within the space community. Before we go to our panel, who are experts in the field, let's take a look at this background story.
Back to the moon and eventually to the red planet. U.S. President Donald Trump has formally told NASA to refocus America's space program on lunar exploration and discovery.
It marks an important step in returning American astronauts to the moon for the first time since 1972 for long-term exploration and use.
That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
The small step 45 years ago pointed to the route of future space exploration, but since that time, no human has ventured out beyond low Earth orbit. NASA doesn't even have its own space vehicle, having retired shuttles in 2011. This time may be a start.
We will not only plant our flag and leave our footprint, we will establish a foundation for an eventual mission to Mars, and perhaps someday to many worlds beyond.
But for now, the question is whether the U.S. Congress will appropriate the funds needed to turn Trump's words into reality. Returning astronauts to the moon was the plan under former President George W. Bush, which called for building a moon base.
Returning to the moon is an important step for our space program.
But it failed without billions of dollars more in funding. That's why the Obama administration shifted the focus from the moon to a flexible path that would target new destinations to get astronauts farther out into deep space.
I believe we can send humans to orbit, Mars, and return them safely to Earth.
But the asteroid mission proved more difficult than expected. For many, space exploration has always been a dream. Just like Trump said on Monday, to lift our eyes all the way up to the heavens and once again imagine the possibilities waiting in those big, beautiful stars. We are dreaming big.
Will Mr. Trump's plan to shoot for the moon land him among the stars anyway? Let's loop in our panelists with us in Beijing. Mr. Yuguang, who is a professor at the China Aerospace Science and Industry Corporation. Welcome back to our program. In The Hague, we have Giuseppe Reibaldi, who is the president of the Moon Village Association and also director of the Human Spaceflight at the International Academy of Astronautics. And in Columbus, United States, we invited John Horack, a professor and Neil Armstrong Chair in Aerospace Policy at Ohio State University. Welcome back as well. Let me begin with you, Professor Horack. What does that mean? Once again, the moon mission reminded us of what happened in the Cold War. Is the U.S. really looking for a competition?
In my opinion, the answer is no. This is a very different trip to the moon, a very different mode of going than we saw in the late 1960s and early 1970s. The president emphasized collaboration with other nations. He emphasized the role of commercial spaceflight. And while the first Apollo missions, the 6 landings that we had, were sort of a first test of how to get to the moon and how to get back safely, we learned a lot. But this will be a more permanent opportunity for us to go to the moon with all people on Earth and to stay.
But Mr. Reibaldi, we understand in the community of outer space in the U.S., there are a lot of debate about that. What do you make of this possibility? What's behind it?
I think the decision of Mr. Trump put right the policy of the United States. The policy of last policy of the United States was issued in 2010 under Obama, and he did not envisage the moon as a first priority, but he was mainly referring to Mars. So the policy just ratified by Trump is putting the moon back as a first priority for the United States and for the rest of their allies. So I think that is a major political change which will help the United States and all the people working, cooperating with them, focus on the activity related to a sustainable moon exploration.
Mr. Yang, here in Beijing, I did notice Mr. Reibaldi used a word called political change. So what is it? Will this development be driven by political ego? How does China, which is planning its moon missions, think about this new policy possibility coming from the U.S.?
Well, I should emphasize that China developed the space technology depending on our own needs. So it is, we always think that it is meaningless for us to compete with any other country, including the United States. But you see, the final destination of the United States is to go to Mars. And for other countries like Russia and China, because we have never been to the moon before, so go to the moon will be a very necessary step for us to go, even if we, in the future, we sooner or later want to go to the Mars, because we can test many technologies during this procedure. And moreover, the moon is very important to the human being, and also it is very hopeful to be an outpost of human being and to have more resources utilized by human being to get more deeper space into the solar system.
So what you are saying is that you actually 100% understand why President Trump talking about going back to the moon? Is that what you're saying?
That depends. I have emphasized before that it is reasonable for the Obama government to cancel the Constellation program of the George W. Bush government, because you know that the Constellation program, the main goal is to return to the moon, but it repeats the Apollo system. For the United States, because they have already been to the moon already, so it's meaningless for them to repeat the Apollo program. So I think this is reasonable. But for the future, if they can set up a permanent base on the lunar surface and utilize the resources, it will be helpful for the final Mars mission.
Is that in the blueprint, Mr. Horack?
So I think the answer is yes. I have advocated for quite a while that I think the moon is an important stepping stone, testing ground, and place for us to prove out systems on our way to Mars. If Mars was a golf hole playing golf, I think it's too long to make it all the way in one swing. And so therefore you do it in stages, you do it in steps, and the moon is a very, very good place for us to go together, to build the technologies and the facilities and the know-how needed to go further on.
But the question is, Mr. Reibaldi, is it really about togetherness, or is it really about competition? I think that is the core of the issue, isn't it?
I don't think that there is a competition. The issue is mainly related to tap new resources. The main difference has been said earlier. In the past was just prestige and political. Nowadays the considerations are economical. The moon is one location where economy can be developed, and therefore investment from private industry are going to be unleashed by going to the moon. In fact, the U.S. government is behind all other government, and particularly private industry, that they are already planning to go to the moon next year with the Google X Prize.
Yes, here's the thing,
so
Mr. Horack.
that is the main difference. So
yeah, okay, I got it. Mr. Horack, here's the thing. Your colleagues already talk about the money issue. Secondly, how to streamline this relationship between NASA and some of the other commercial operations likely to also guiding the United States back again to the moon. Thirdly, what are some of the core barometers that's likely to measure the success or failure of the future mission? Fourthly, there's a thing that you also need to answer, that is, will this be politically, in a way, winning Trump more, or actually it is going to get a lot of oppositions in political field? Professor Horack, I know a lot of questions, but these are all important ones.
Well, I think that's a very comprehensive question. Let me do my very best.
Go ahead, sir.
First of all, you mentioned competition, and in the United States, competition forms around economy, around ideas, around innovation, around disruption. And so I think when we talk about competition, we're not talking about a competition between nations for demonstration of power, but a competition of ideas, a competition of business models. So there will be that kind of competition in the United States, Western Europe. We thrive on that. Secondly, you asked about resources. I agree with my colleague from Europe that this is about resources. It's about getting new resources. It's about how do we find new materials, new ways to make positive impacts and impact the quality of life. And from a political perspective, space is an extremely important area for us to collaborate because it's a place where we figure it out rather than fight it out. And this is incredibly important for the future of everyone on the Earth, that we compete in the marketplace of ideas and not in the marketplace of destruction, that we compete in the marketplace of progress and well-being and not in competitive ways that are destructive for people on Earth.
That certainly is the ideals that the space community has been upholding from your perspective. But one of the crucial issues, Professor Horack, is the relationship between the government operations and also the private and the business operations about the Mars, the moons right now. What is likely to be that relationship? What is going to be the one that the government funding responsible, and how will the commercial operations develop? How will they interact with one another? Will that be competition or rather cooperation? We don't know. Professor Horack, do we know?
Well, we are actually running that experiment in the United States right now. NASA is changing. It is evolving. You can see the United States' reliance on commercial enterprise to resupply the space station. Coming soon, within the next 18 months, we will have commercial companies launching astronauts into space. And so where in history NASA has been the customer, if you will, and creating the demand to go to the moon or to go to Mars or to go to Jupiter or Saturn, you're seeing space agencies around the world. I was with Jan Werner, the head of ESA, last week, and we talked a lot about the emerging role. Space agencies will become facilitators, innovators, integrators, and not necessarily customers. Yes, there will be a customer dimension, but we're actually working very well in the United States with SpaceX and Blue Origin and Sierra Nevada and other private companies to help them grow space, and the relationship with NASA is very strong.
All right. Mr. Yang, well, the United States is trying to work out about that relationship. What about for China? At this point, what is the biggest obstacles for China to fulfill its dream of going to the moon, which has always been in China's legends anyway?
Well, you know that China is not performing its space station program, so this program will last for about 10 years. And so, although it has not been approved by the government, central government yet, but the aerospace industry and also the China National Space Organizations also already expressed the wish to perform the human missions to the moon. So in the future, we will already have some preliminary studies and also performing some key technology studies for the future potential lunar manned missions.
Then I need to follow up with a question to you, Mr. Yang. What do you think? Will there be really cooperation between the Chinese side and the United States side?
Well, actually speaking, yes, the cooperation between China and the U.S. is really difficult, but it's all on the U.S. side, because China has expressed many times that we are willing to cooperate with any other countries, including the United States. And also, we have already have examples on our future space station program, because we already signed some agreements with the European side and other countries, and also with UN to perform some joint experiments on board the China space stations. changes. So in the future, in the potential lunar manned mission, I think the change, it will not change. Besides, also during the robotic lunar missions in the next several years, we also have payloads from the European side and other countries.
But that's with the European side. Mr. Reibaldi, do you think a real cooperation could happen between China and the United States if we're all talking about a common goal, going to the moon?
In fact, the Moon Village Association, which we created, has exactly that goal. The United States and China, they have a problem related to the law. As you know, the Senate of the United States forbid, for the time being, with the present administration, direct cooperation between the United States and China. And so I think we need to avoid the creation of separate programs like space station, the ISS, the Chinese space station. We really have to put all those programs together, and that is the vision of the Moon Village. That is basically all the parties, stakeholders, industry, government, in the university, public that is interested in the moon, put under the same umbrella for the benefit of mankind. Moon Village is the answer to all of this. Everybody will be part. There will be a component, a Chinese component, an American component, but all on the same heading, the Moon Village.
Well, you've been doing a lot of advertisement for your association, but that certainly is an ideal you are pursuing. Good for you. Though, in reality, it is getting complicated. Professor Horack, therefore, go to you. You talk about those ideals, sir. You talk about your common dream with your colleagues from all over the world, including from China. But that's within the space community. We're not talking about politics yet. When it gets to the politics, becoming ever more complicated. United States and the former Soviet Union, during the Cold War era, one of the biggest competition going on between these two countries, war in the outer space, specifically on the moon. And many worry these days with all these political intensity going on and the debates. Will that be repeated for the future? What can space community do in this regard?
I think that you have put your finger on the issue, and that is that the challenges we have are political. Professor Yang, who sits next to you there in the studio, is a dear friend of mine. We work together across the United States and China in scientific collaborations extremely well. We're economically so tied together that we can't do without each other. And if our governments are truly the representatives of the people, they follow the lead of those who put them in office. I also am reminded that, yes, the Cold War was not a time when the United States and Russia were friendly, but today we depend on each other. In the lifetime of my grandfather, the United States and Japan were at war. The United States and Germany were at war. And today these are some of our most trusted and valued partners on the planet. So these things not only can happen, they do happen. And I believe that the space community can be an important factor in making sure that they must happen.
Here's the thing, Mr. Yang. Besides that political issue, another issue also lingering, which is with the recent goal of the United States of going back to the moon, is it an indication that we've been going so fast in our space exploration and the development? We need to slow down to absorb more what we already had. Or actually, we should be going further and further to the outer space to explore even into the more unknown areas and space. Mr. Yang, what is your thinking about this?
Well, this question concerns with the returns of the space program, even the human space program, or those for the deeper space exploration. Actually speaking, most of the returns come from the indirect ones, as I read some example before, because you can seldom see the direct returns from the manned space program or deep space exploration, either a manned or robotic ones. But you know, that's the return rate of the these kind of space programs are very high, according to the analysis of very many research institutes. So it is very necessary for China to have this kind of program, although maybe we should wait for many years to see the returns from these programs for the whole society. But we can see that the economic prosper of the United States in the 1990s, there are experts think that there are also contributions from the Apollo program. So you can see the booming of economic growth in the Internet era is also have some relationship with the lunar programs.
In the issue of outer space exploration, Mr. Reibaldi, are we going too fast? Should we slow down? Or actually we're at the right speed?
I think the speed is related by the sustainability. That is the key. So exploration cannot follow political lead, certainly not these days. So the path is to follow the economics. So in order to follow the economics, you need sustainability. So we have now reached low Earth orbit has been saturated by government program. They will be following up by industrial program, which will have their own private industrial space station. And then the next logical step, again sustainable, is the moon. And so it will go after that. So as long as something becomes sustainable and therefore economic, there we are going to go. Exploration for the sake of science is of course a fundamental, and this will be staying with all the government, but there is only a certain amount of money which will be dedicated to the exploration per se. The rest, it has to be sustainable, and that is explained why the moon is the next step.
We only have very limited time left, gentlemen, but my final question for all of you is, we've seen a booming of technological advancements over the past few years. You know, with robotics, with artificial intelligence, people are going into the study of human beings' minds in order to find out what is going to be the future and direction of our development. And at the same time, we still have the outer space exploration. How are we going to see these different directions of development, of experiments, of scientific explorations? Which is likely to be the future trend? Let's go to you, Professor Horack.
I think the answer to that question is related to what Professor Yang said. The world we live in today is a result of the investments made in science, technology, and in my opinion, in particular, space exploration in the past, whether it's GPS, whether it's the satellite technology that we're using to communicate now, whether it's the materials in my automobile. These are things that have come out of and enriched, not only enriched the life that we have, but have almost defined the way we live. And so the future that our children will inherit is going to be a function of what we do now. And therefore, I think this investment in going to the moon, in sustainability, and in the competition of ideas and commercial ideas and business, it's going to be what defines the future for our children.
Mr. Reibaldi, very briefly from you too.
I think the future is also a combination between artificial intelligence and human intelligence. In order to explore, you will require a lot also of autonomous tasks, and these autonomous tasks will have substantially technology on the Earth, as has been said. Exploration is going to develop new technology which we're going to use for the benefit on Earth. All
right, Mr. Yang, briefly.
Well, for this topic, I should emphasize that the direction in the space exploration will be very important for the development of human being. If we can invest more on this field, we can have even better and faster development of the whole human society.
Yang Yuguang, Giuseppe Reibaldi, and John Horack, thank you so much, gentlemen, for being with us. All the best, whether to the moon or to the Mars.